Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its history and what it's like to fight in-game as well. As always, these videos are based on your suggestions that you leave down in the comment section below, and today's was left by King DM6, and they've asked to see Hobgoblins. So if there's a monster that you'd like to see me draw, make sure to leave that down in the comment section. Or if you'd like to vote on the order in which I do my monsters, if you want to make sure that your monster is the one that I do next week, next month, what have you, I leave that up to a vote on Patreon that all my patrons get to contribute to. So head over to Patreon if you'd like to pick which monsters that I draw next. And as well, all of your support really helps this channel to grow and allows me to continue making videos like this every single week. But anyway, I've been really looking forward to doing a video on Hobgoblins, so let's get started. One of the reasons that I'm so excited about doing a video on Hobgoblins is because with this video on Hobgoblins, I get to complete a whole chapter of the monster manual on goblinoids. Because now we've talked about goblins, nilbogs, bugbears, and we've even covered things that were considered goblinoids in previous editions, like kobolds. But what are hobgoblins? Why are they different from goblins? Well, as I've kind of touched on before, they're the cousins of the little lovable goblins that we all know, and also the kind of bestial, hairy bugbears. But these guys, unlike their more savage kin, are kind of refined warriors, still murderous and aggressive, but they're kind of more military in their outlook, in their approach to war, and they see combat as an art form. And their civility and intelligence sees them as kind of war masters and leaders in an otherwise unruly kind of goblinoid horde. Standing at roughly 6 to 7 feet tall, on average, they're much less physically imposing than their wild sort of bugbear cousins, but they still fill the role of a kind of commander to them implicitly, despite being less physically strong. Hobgoblins were introduced to D&D in 1974's White Box set, and they were joined a year later by a variant of hobgoblins, these kind of aquatic hobgoblins called Coelinth. We might need to cover. Hopefully they're a video for another day. But hobgoblins are so popular that they've even become a playable monster race in Volo's Guide to Monsters, despite their natural propensity to lean towards a lawful evil alignment. But why hob? What aside from their height and their kind of civility makes these guys a different species, or at least a different family member from the goblinoid sort of evolutionary tree? Well, I was quite surprised to find out that in terms of mythology and folklore, goblins and hobgoblins do actually have totally different histories and folklore as a species as well. A hob is an ancient Northern English or kind of Scottish, around that kind of border, word for a kind of mischievous but sometimes helpful household spirit or a fairy. And this word is used pretty interchangeably with the word elf in similar folklore. And this is given special significance, the inspiration for hobgoblins in D&D, because of their similarities, through the word elf, to the Uruk-hai in The Lord of the Rings. Because if hob means elf, then hobgoblin technically means elf goblin. We can draw parallels to Tolkien's orc folk or Uruk-hai. Orcs in Tolkien's mythology were born of corrupted and tortured elves. Although in the Lord of the Rings books, the Uruk-hai are described as black-skinned, the Peter Jackson films depicted them as red-skinned, which is a common way of drawing hobgoblins in D&D. The Uruk-hai are also seen as superior to other breeds of orcs, not just because of their ability to survive in sunlight, but because of their mastery of the arts of war, of tactics, of swordcraft, and skill with bows and shields, more like humans than the kind of savage orcs. And although there may have not been sort of deliberate influence there, this same distinction permeates to hobgoblins, who stand above their other goblin brothers due to their proficiency with weapons and tactics and their intelligence as a weapon. And as a result, I draw upon this influence from the Uruk-hai in my drawing here, although I like to keep all my goblinoids with kind of green skin and the long noses as well, to keep them noticeably different from orcs and things like that, and it's just how I've kind of always pictured goblins. Kind of ties them together as a family of sort of similar goblinoid creatures, although it was a point that was hotly debated in my bugbear video. Again, it's just my preference. But the word hob has origins that stretch back for hundreds of years. Our earliest known recordings of the word date back to 1530, but it was likely already a part of our folklore and kind of our vernacular by that point. It's actually a contracted form of the name Robert or Robin, taken from a mythological legendary figure known as Robin Goodfellow, a Middle English demon or domestic fairy, also sometimes referred to as Puck, who guest stars in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream as a character. Other famous hobgoblins from British folklore include Blue Birches, the Shapeshifter, and Robin Roundcap, benevolent sort of chore-completing house guest. We also have Dobby, the prankster, who lived in caves, curing children of whooping cough, but also liked to interrupt people's prayers if they were particularly penitent, and tempt them away from a life of abstaining from alcohol, because Dobby deemed it less fun. We see a similar sort of disrupting influence in this elf goblin in the form of Dobby, the house elf in the Harry Potter films and books. Hobgoblins were considered sort of helpful pranksters, but they were deemed so helpful in sort of folklore in the region that in rural parts of the UK you might still hear, very rarely, but you might still hear the expression that Master Dobbs has been helping you if you accomplish vastly more work than has been expected of you. Despite a similar level of industriousness, the hobgoblins of D&D are less tiny, kindly spirits and are more like Klingons or the Uruk-hai or Viking war masters. Compared to all other goblinoids, hobgoblins are civil. They organise cities and towns that resemble sort of military camps, where they trade with outsiders even. Hobgoblins almost always know common, so as to better their reception with their visitors and embark on trade deals. They trade and craft highly functional but never really ornamental weapons and armour, seeing their skill in their ability to shed blood as the beauty of the weapon rather than its physical appearance. They're so refined and disciplined as to even practice the ways of the monk as assassins, which they call the Path of Iron Shadow, and can master spellcraft as wizards and sorcerers do, but rather being sort of something revered and mystical as regular goblins have this kind of word booyarg, this kind of feared and respected term. Hobgoblins that practice magic are called devastators and are seen as another outlet of military exploration. Those devastators are educated from a very early age at the Academy of Devastation, where hobgoblins are taught the most potent and deadly evocation magic, but see no need to probe into the science or the magic or the origins of magic, really. They care little for the schools of illusion, divination, transmutation, things like that. And I imagine they would also find things like restoration magics or necromancy perhaps abominable, because behind the civility of their culture and studies beats the raging lifeblood of combat that fuels all of goblin kind. For a hobgoblin to flee from combat, to survive a fatal or near-fatal wound, carries more dishonour than a valorous death at the hands of a skilled opponent. From an early age, from as early as they can hold a weapon, hobgoblins will dream of a heroic death in battle, just like this kind of Viking culture of Valhalla, this reward of an afterlife, a beautiful afterlife that can only be achieved upon a heroic death in combat. Similarly, hobgoblins believe that if they die a heroic death, they may join their ancestors in the eternal battle by the side of the great conqueror god, Maglubiet. Like the other goblinoids, hobgoblins had their own deities before Maglubiet conquered their pantheon, namely Nomeg Gea, the tyrannical leader, and Bargriviek, the god of duty, unity, and discipline. These gods are still honoured by the priests and politicians of Hobgoblin society because A, their disciplines are in line with Maglubiet, and because B, Hobgoblin societies are broken into strict sort of military ranks based on meritorious action in the field of combat, and these other deities are simply seen as higher ranking than Hobgoblin warlords, but lower than Maglubiet itself, so there's still a place for them in this kind of military hierarchy of worship. However, no monuments or temples are usually built in the names of these gods, no time wasted on their worship for the everyday soldier, when the skill of combat, honing one's ability with weapons, and taking lives are seen as acts of worship and devotion instead. Hobgoblins will raise flags, bow, or salute existing icons and symbols of their gods out of respect and honour, but this is seen as dutiful behaviour. And despite their evil alignment, duty, honour, respect, things like that are really, really important to hobgoblins. They strive to withhold insulting their gods by forgetting about them, because they detest those who would show discourtesy and become easily enraged by those that refuse to operate on a mutual level of respect given by hobgoblins. One caveat to the strict adherence to a society and status based on military rank and accomplishment is that of the relationship between a hobgoblin and their noses, weirdly. Hobgoblin noses are weirdly important to them. They often change colour when enraged or excited. This is seen as a similar sort of flush to when humans' cheeks might sort of become rosy tinted when boiling over with rage, for example, or when they're embarrassed. On rare occasions, hobgoblins are born with bright blue or bright red noses, which is seen as a sign of potency and virility. Those who are born in this way are often given preferential treatment and wind up occupying superior ranks and political esteem. I like to think that perhaps makeup or war paint would play a massive part in hobgoblin society as a result. That just as we sort of apply makeup to make ourselves look more attractive, a hobgoblin might use makeup or war paint to kind of paint their nose in a red or blue colour if they occupy a kind of high rank. Maybe it's symbolic, maybe they feel like this is something that denotes their rank and they can display it proudly, even if they're not born with something like that. It's an indication of rank, because I don't believe they would use it deceptively, but it might have just become a symbol over time, something that you might want to use in your campaign. But I've no idea where this kind of colourful nose equals status thing came from, where the inspiration of that might be. I know that in nature we do see some similar behaviour. I know that mandrills have been maybe a reference here. They have blue and red faces that flush with colour, and that does happen when they get more agitated or aggressive. They are usually quite colourful anyway, but they do get this kind of flush with blood and a flush with colour. Their adrenaline surges, but it doesn't really indicate sort of social rank or social hierarchy within the mandrill species or within their communities. Elephant seals also flare their nostrils to establish dominance and territory, so I suppose it could be a fusion of these two ideas, but I couldn't find any particular story or legend that might connect these ideas between hobgoblins and their noses other than, hey, this sounds like a really cool idea. And it's not something that's used very often, so I think that's quite original and quite exciting for a concept. But let me know if you know of anything like that might be the influence for this in Hobgoblins, or if it's just something that the creators of D&D came up with themselves. Now, in terms of what these things are like to fight, I don't think they'll massively surprise you. In the monster manual, we have 3 types of hobgoblins, and in Volo's Guide to Monsters, we have a couple more. We have the standard hobgoblin at 1/2 challenge rating, hobgoblin captains at challenge rating 3, and the hobgoblin warlord at challenge rating 6 in the monster manual. They have pretty ordinary stats and hit points. They have long swords and longbows, or great swords and javelins, and all these kind of fairly standard attacks, but they might be a great thing for you to use as a DM if you find that your players are needing to fight something with some heavy armour, because these guys, even at their lowest level, start off with chainmail and a shield, so they start off with armour class 18. That could pose a really interesting challenge. And hobgoblin warlords even have plate armour and a shield, so they have AC 20. The thing that makes these guys really exciting is their martial advantage, which once per turn allows them to deal an extra bit of damage. For hobgoblins it's 2d6, for captains it's 3d6, and 4d6 for the goblin warlord. And this means that they do that extra damage when they hit with a weapon attack once per turn, so they've got quite heavy armour and they deal a lot of damage when they hit. Interestingly enough, the Hobgoblin Devastator also gets to use this ability instead of on their weapon attacks. They have a quarterstaff that deals 1d6 plus 1 damage, but Hobgoblin Devastator is so attuned to the nature of destruction itself that they can use this kind of martial advantage instead as arcane advantage, granting them 2d6 extra damage when they hit with a damaging spell. Hobgoblin captains and warlords also get an ability called Leadership that operates fairly similarly to a kind of bardic inspiration, where they can inspire their troops, rally their army around them, allowing non-hostile creatures to add a d4 to their attack rolls or saving throws once they've heard this command. It only lasts for a minute, they have to be able to hear the command within 30 feet, and they can only benefit from one of these benefits, sort of leadership die at a time, but it's still really useful and definitely displays this kind of military rank and the power of orders in terms of Hobgoblin society. Similarly, Hobgoblin Devastators can command with their spells in a sort of similar way. They have an ability called Army Arcana, which, if it's using these devastating spells up close It can make itself and any number of nearby allies immune to the damage of that explosive blast. So they have things like Fireball and Lightning Bolt and Ice Storm that they can just make their whole army immune to. Warlords are especially scary at a challenge rating 6 because they get an ability called Parry, which means that while in melee combat, Hobgoblin Warlord can use a reaction to add 3 to its AC if it's about to be struck down by an attack. So Hobgoblins are absolutely one of my all-time favourite creatures to use. I tend to put them in my campaigns and sort of reflavor them and reskin them whenever I have a kind of military encounter with my players. If they're fighting well-trained and organised militia or soldiers or something along those lines, I will use the stats from Hobgoblins, even if they don't technically appear as Hobgoblins all the time in my campaigns. They're characterful and wonderful creatures to use in any campaign, whether you use them for their military skill or for their culture as Hobgoblins. But anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please make sure to leave a little thumbs up down below. Maybe favourite this video and share it with your group in case you're about to go up against a legion of Hobgoblins. We are still an ever-growing horde under Maglubiet's banner, so anything you can do like that really helps this channel to grow and establishes this community, so thank you very much. If you'd like to support me in a more personal way and help me make these videos every single week, as well as choose which Monster Mondays I get to do every month, and earn rewards like copies of all the Monster Mondays that I draw each month, I'd urge you to head over to my Patreon page. My backers get all sorts of rewards for helping me continue to make videos like this. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. If there are monsters that you'd like to see me draw, please make sure to leave suggestions down in the comment section, and I will add them to the to draw list. Always make sure to pay your Hobgoblin trader respect, and until next time, happy monster hunting.